I've watched a lot of One Piece card game content on YouTube. Not naming names, but I've noticed that creators will make deck guides without actually providing much information, if any at all, and more so just showing the deck list and reading the cards. Contrary to popular belief, I already know how to read, and usually if I'm watching a deck guide, I want to know things like when should I go first or second, when should I be taking hits or defending, and different lines of play for certain matchups. This video will prove as the definitive guide to the Enel deck, covering deck lists, tech choices, optimal sequencing, matchup guides, and showing a few games. Enel is a control deck at its core. The leader ability allows you to once per turn heal when your life would go to 0. Essentially, if you're at 1 life, you're actually at 2 life. I'm going to give a quick example. You have 2 life, and your opponent has 1 character on the field, meaning with their leader, they have 2 attacks. They attack with the leader, and you take it. You now have 8 cards in hand, and 1 life. They attack with the character. You take it. You use your leader effect to discard, and heal back the 1 life. You now still have 8 cards in hand, and 1 life, but you gained access to a new card while discarding the worst card in your hand, usually something that does not have counter. Your goal in this deck is to control the board to maintain that exact game state as often as possible, using a combination of removal, healing, or both. You want to have the same amount of life as the number of attacks on your opponent's board. Most decks don't play cards that have rush, so this is pretty easy to read. Surely you wouldn't just look at the deck list and click off of the video, right? I mean, if you just wanted a deck list, you could go look at a bunch of those, but what I'm trying to give you in this video is way more than that. You might see some cards that are not standard to being played. I will explain my reasoning for those cards, and also be giving recommendations on other cards that you can play in those spots if you don't like them. While you can if you want, I don't recommend that you copy my deck card for card. Choose cards that fit your playstyle and your preference, and plus the game is more fun when you're playing with your own creation anyway. After the deck explanation, I will show a few examples of different builds. Let's start with the 2Ks. I believe 12 2Ks is the correct amount to play. If you want to play more, you can, but I don't think that you should play less. First on the list is Flampe. In the deck explanation portion, I was talking about keeping your life at the same number as the amount of attacks on your opponent's board. And early game, this card is how you do that. If your opponent has 2 attacks on their board and you're at 3 life, you play this card, you get a free draw, get set up for free defense on the next turn. This card can also come up late game. You have cards like Yamato and Kingdom Come that require you to be at 1 life to get full value out of them. Sometimes opponents will like to leave you at 2 life to hold you back from this value, and Flampe will punish that play big time. Flampe into Yamato or Flampe into Kingdom Come is insane, so many free cards. The other 2Ks in this deck are mostly played just because they are 2Ks, but they also have incredibly powerful trigger effects. Beej's trigger will lock a card from attacking. Occasionally, this will give you a free win in a game state that would otherwise be unwinnable. This doesn't happen incredibly often, but when it does, your opponent is sure to get super mad about it. Frankie is a new card. He says if you trigger him from life, you can draw a card, and if you're at 2 or less life when it happens, you can summon him. And Enel is a deck based around being at 2 or less life. Triggering a free attack can shift the game really fast when your opponent thought they knew what to expect on the next turn, and now that's changed. You can also use Katakuri 8-drop to put Frankie back into your life. It won't happen much, but it's an insane synergy when you can pull it off. Next, I'll be talking about the trigger cards. These cards are mainly played because of their insane trigger effects, although I do cast these cards for their full cost often. Shirahoshi. Shirahoshi's on-play effect is to draw 3 cards and discard 2, and the trigger effect lets you play it for free. You don't actually gain any cards by doing this, but filtering through your deck is really important, and I'll fill you in on why. You might have noticed, this deck plays a lot of cards without counter, 25 to be exact. It's very possible that your hand is huge and has no counter in it, and you can lose the game when you shouldn't be. Shirahoshi fixes this issue, and it's really important to play 4 of it. Also, you can put it back into your life with Katakuri and use the effect multiple times. Onami. Onami is a card that many people have cut down on this set, but I believe the trigger is so powerful that it still deserves to be in the deck, and the on-play can be really useful too. The trigger lets you pop a 5 cost or less when you hit it. Also, when you cast this card, you can give a card banish, and then put Nami back into your life with Katakuri, letting you pop a card on your opponent's turn, which is an incredibly efficient way to use Tendan. Kiku Nojo. Kiku Nojo is another card that a lot of people have cut down recently. I will admit, not having counter is a big downside to this card, but I believe it's important to actually have cards to cast in the early game, and you get to filter enough cards that it'll probably be fine. Kiku is a 6k beater that punishes your opponent for removing it, and it has a trigger that's insanely busted but you could pull it off. If you don't want to play this card, I get it, but personally I think it's still worth playing. Next we'll talk about the mid-game removal. Gidatsu. Gidatsu is undeniably a 4-of in this set's meta. This is the card that you want to mull for most of the time. It's the best trade you can make early game. He lets you pop an opponent's character with cost equal to or less than their life, while putting a decent sized body on the board. Before you get to the bomb turns, this is what you want to play. Rocket Luffy. If you're at 2 or less life, Luffy can KO himself to KO an opponent's character with 4 or less and draw a card. This is essentially a very powerful event card that KOs a character and replaces itself, but unlike an event card, it has counter power, and if you don't have anything else to do with your current hand, you can cast him as a vanilla. It also has a very powerful trigger effect. Alright, that's enough of the early game. Let's show off some of these crazy bombs. I believe you should play at least a full playset of bombs that you can cast at 7 or less mana, whatever combination of these cards that you like. Personally, I'm playing 1 Ace, 2 Enel, and 1 7-Mom, whereas the more control-heavy builds might just want to play 4 7-Mom. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of 7-Mom in this current format, and I'll explain why later, but test your own ratios and form your own opinion if you don't want to copy my lineup. Ace is just a massive rush card for his mana cost. He can absolutely steal games when your opponent doesn't expect it, or just trade into other characters in the early game. 7-Mom lets your opponent decide on which on-play effect she gets, either healing you or burning your opponent. The reason why I don't think she's very good right now is there is multiple matchups where you want to leave your opponent at high life so that Gidatsu and Yamato are stronger. 7-Mom is useless in these matchups and you won't even want to cast her, which I will talk about more once we get to the matchup section. Also, a 7 cost is relatively easy for black decks to remove, unlike Enel. My personal favorite of the 7 drops, Enel has Rush and a very powerful effect to protect himself from removal by trashing your top life. Sticking Bombs is the answer to the black matchup, and they have to work really hard to remove this card. He usually sticks around for a few turns, swinging the game in your favor. Also, it's worth mentioning that if your last life is trashed by his effect, the leader will still allow you to heal. The rest of these bombs are unquestionably 4-ofs. These are the best yellow cards in the game. You have Katakuri. Katakuri gives you the earliest guaranteed heal effect available at 8 Dan, so if your opponent is going aggro on you, you can feel safe going to 0 life as long as you have 8 Dan next turn and a card on the field. His effect lets you pick any character, 8 costs or less, on either board and pop it back into the owner's life. Most of the time you'll be using this effect to heal, but he can out problematic bombs on the opponent's field like 8-cost Kid or Isho. Like I mentioned earlier, his effect can also recycle triggers on your field to be used again, like Frankie, Nami, or Shirahoshi. Yamato. As mentioned in the first section, the theme of this deck is removal and healing, and Yamato does both. She lets you pop a character with cost equal or less to both players' life total. So if you're at 1 and your opponent's at 3, she'll pop a 4 cost and heal. Yamato is what this deck revolved around for the longest time, that is, until we got Ace. Ace is the best card in Yellow's arsenal, allowing you to heal while also having Rush at a 10k body. This card is basically a guaranteed damage or removal of any tap character. Enel has always been a good deck, but this card is the reason why Enel is now a tier 1 deck. And lastly, we'll talk about the event cards. Disappear is a 0-cost event that lets you discard a card for plus 3k. Essentially, it's a 1k that turns a card with 0 counter into a 2k. This card does fix some of the issues that this deck has with playing too many cards without counter, but at the cost of discarding some of the most powerful cards in the deck. A lot of lists are playing multiple of this card now. I'm only playing 1 because I hate having multiple in hand, and I think with Shirahoshi and the leader effect, I usually have enough filtering effects to fix the hand anyway. But if you want to play multiple, I do not blame you. Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come is a 6-cost event that KOs any character on the field while burning your own life down to 1. Optimally, when you play this card, you will be at 1 life anyway. The main reason to play this card is because 9-cost Zoro exists. 9-cost Zoro is the bane of this deck. If your opponent casts Zoro, you better have this on the next turn. If you're playing against green, hold this card in your hand the whole game, maybe even mulligan for it. Do not use it against 8-cost Kid unless you have multiple. I know it's tempting, but you have to respond to Zoro with this card or you will lose the game. Also, this card is really good into the mirror match. You can use it to remove a bomb while still having 4 Don left over to attach to your bombs and swing onto your opponent's characters. And the last card on this list is Blaze Slice. You have probably never seen this card. No one plays it. I don't know why. This card is nuts. We used to play this card called Amaru, and Amaru let you tap your opponent's blockers so that you could push for game. Blaze Slice also does this, while also being an insane card on defense. Blaze Slice can buff your leader or any character by 1k for the entire turn, while also tapping down a 4-cost or less. I cannot tell you how many games this set I have won from this card alone, either buying an extra turn when my opponent thought they would win, or tapping down a blocker and killing my opponent a turn early. I almost want to bump this card up to 3, but for now I'm at 2. Now, I promised I would show you some other examples of deck lists at the end of this section, so here's some changes that you could make if you want to. I think the most cuttable cards in this list are Kikunojo, Onami, 5-cost Ace, and Frankie. If you want to play a more control-heavy build, you should add in more copies of Kingdom Come, 7 Mom, or Disappear, and you could play Blocker Shirahoshi. If you want to play a more aggro build, you could add in cards like Satori and Amaru, and more copies of Rush Enel and Rush Ace, though I think the control build is better for now. Honorable mention to the Wano cards. I still think these cards are good, I just like the new cards better. Hiyori letting you stack a trigger, and Momo giving you the cheapest heal card available in the whole game. Again, form your own opinions and make your own deck list, but if you want my opinion, this is what I'm giving you. All of the information that I'm about to give you can and will change depending on what matchup you're playing against. But that is going to be a lot of information to remember at once, so just start by remembering these few things. In a vacuum, this deck will choose to go second. Going first gives you the first attack, while going second gives you the first draw. Enel doesn't care very much about his first attack, since you won't win until you establish a board anyway, but building a huge hand is something the deck is really good at, so you'll choose to go second. This might be like the craziest game I've ever had. If we were at locals, we'd be in time. Dude, I have 5 cards left in my deck. I better fucking win soon. The even curve from going second will allow you to play Kikunojo into Gidatsu, into Katakuri, into Ace. Though, admittedly, the odd curve of going first is pretty good too. Don't defend. In the early game, take every hit thrown at you to help you get to low life and resolve that juicy leader effect as soon as possible. This might take a little while to get used to. It'll feel really different from playing other decks, but you want to take advantage of your leader's effect as often as possible. The reason why this deck gets such a big hand size is because it doesn't need to defend at all in the early game. Prioritize attacking board over attacking life. Once your board is developed, it will not be hard to go for game. Prioritize keeping your opponent's board minimalized for as long as possible. And lastly, know when to use the starve strategy. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but in certain matchups you actually don't want to attack your opponent's leader. One Piece as a game has a certain timer. Since you can use your mana to power up your leader's attacks, the game will always end after a certain amount of time, even if both players had no cards, hypothetically. Enel is the only deck in the game that does not have this timer because of the heal effect. If you're at 1 life, your opponent needs a minimum of 3 attacks to kill you, which means you can eat 2 attacks without discarding every turn and then heal on your next turn with one of the bombs. You can drag the game out as long as possible. By not attacking your opponent's life and only attacking into their characters, they will be losing cards while you're gaining cards, and as long as your late game plays are better than theirs, you'll end up with a full board and they will have nothing. And then you turn all of your cards sideways and you win in 1 turn. You want to do this against decks that don't play bombs, and most of, if not all of their cards, are able to be popped by Gidatsu or Yamato. The perfect example of a deck to starve is Red Purple Law. I will give you a good example of this in the... These are the decks that I'll be covering here, because these are the decks that I respect the most. I'm sorry if your deck didn't make the cut, but this video is already really long and I can't cover every deck in the entire game. First, let's talk about the positive matchups. These are the matchups that you should be winning more often than you are losing. First on this list is Red Purple Law. Your key cards in this matchup are Gidatsu, Rocket Luffy, and Yamato. Choose to go second and mulligan to try and see as many of these cards as possible. The name of the game in this matchup is removal. Do not attack their life at all until you're ready to push for game. By keeping them at high life, Gidatsu would be able to pop a 4 cost every turn, and Yamato can pop 5 costs. Do not summon 7 Mom in this matchup, because they will take the damage and then all of your pops become weaker. Also, do not summon Flampe in this matchup, because they're going to attack you plenty already, and it's hard to read how many attacks they're going to have because of all the rush cards. They don't have a consistent way to replenish their hand outside of Reiju, and for them to remove any of your cards, they have to go negative, using one of these to out a Gidatsu and 2 of them to out a Yamato. If you follow these tips, at the end of the game, they'll probably only have a few cards in hand and a small field, while you have a field filled with bombs. The only way you lose this matchup is if they rush you down before you can get to your bomb turns, so be sure to play around Kid and Killer. Sometimes you'll have to defend when you don't want to, but as long as you survive until you have 10 Dan, you should be winning the game. Bonnie. The key cards in the Bonnie matchup are Gidatsu, Kingdom Come, and Flampe. Choose to go second and mulligan for those cards, with Kingdom Come probably being the most important to deal with that Zoro. Outside of the mirror match, this will definitely be your grindiest matchup in the game. Try your best not to go to time. I'm not saying you should full on go for the starve strategy in this matchup, but depending on the game state and what you have in hand, it is often correct to not attack their life. This is because the deck plays a lot of 5 drops, and popping a 5 drop with Gidatsu will give you a massive advantage. Usually if you leave them at 5 life, they won't play anything at all on those turns except for 1-drop searchers, but you can still play whatever you want. If they're not playing anything, you want to save your Gidatsu in hand, so you'll usually be casting Rocket Luffy or Kikunojo. Playing against a skilled Bonnie player, they will often not attack your life as well. This is because they know they won't win the game until they establish a full board anyway, and if they leave you at high life, it turns off Ace and Kingdom Come, and it'll make your hand a bit smaller, so when they play Hody Jones, they can tap down your characters and just attack your board instead. This is why I say Flampe is one of your key cards here, because if they're not going to attack your life, you want to take your own life. Once they have Basil Hawkins on field, it's really hard to get any attacks through because they can block one of your attacks with a massive 7k blocker and use a leader effect to tap down another card. But the deck plays very little removal, so your goal is just to build a full board here and make as many good trades along the way as you can. Rosinante can protect Zoro from Kingdom Come, but they can't play both Rosinante and Zoro on the same turn, so be sure to KO Rosinante whenever you get the chance. Also, it's worth mentioning that Katakuri can out 8-drop Kid even while they have Rosinante on the board, especially if they haven't been attacking you, so you don't need to worry about healing. It's going to be a long game for sure, but if you follow all these tips and don't die to Zoro, you will be winning this matchup more than you lose it. Next, I'll cover the neutral matchups. These matchups will give you about a 50-50 chance of winning or losing, so you have to be more skillful than your opponent to come out on top. The first deck I'll be talking about is Blue Dofi. In my humble opinion, blue is a very bad color that is carried by one really good card, one poorly designed and degenerate game-breaking card. Pudding lets you force your opponent to shuffle their hand back into the deck and draw 5 new cards. Enel is a deck that often likes to have 11 or 12 cards in hand, and if you don't play around Pudding, you will lose to it. So for this matchup, I need you to forget everything you have learned this far and choose to go first. In an attempt to keep your hand smaller without directly throwing cards away, going first will give you 1 less card to get shuffled back and give you the first attack. Defend early. If you play Enel how you normally do, you will end up with a lot of cards in hand and low life. By defending early, you can keep those cards in your life instead of your hand, so that if they shuffle your hand, you still have some cards to draw from. The drawback of this is that if you keep your hand small enough, they won't play Pudding at all, and it'll feel like you're doing this for nothing. But I promise you, you don't want to know what it feels like to get a 13-card hand shuffled into your deck and then have to defend against a whole turn. In this matchup, you want to use your leader effect as a last-ditch effort and not base your whole game plan around it. And lastly, attack hard. It's still correct to prioritize attacking board over attacking life, but rushing your opponent's life down is important in the early game because late game they're going to play Kaido and draw 4 cards. You need your bomb's attacks to matter after that. If they still have 4 life after playing a Kaido and you swing your bombs into their life, they're just going to take the attacks and get an even bigger hand. If you have them at 2 or 1 life before Kaido hits the board, they'll have to defend against these big attacks and throw away all of the advantage that Kaido gave them. Now I know what you might be thinking. If this deck forces you to play in such a different way than how it's designed to, how could this matchup be 50-50? This should be a bad matchup, right? And the reason why this matchup is still a 50-50 is because blue sucks. The deck is still slow enough that you should have time to build a board full of bombs, and they do have removal for them, but since blue doesn't have cost reduction, Gravity Blade cannot touch your best cards, and Red Rock costs them their entire turn without establishing a body. If you play a bomb with an insane entrance effect, or, rush, and they spend their entire turn removing it, you still got the entrance effect already, and you're absolutely winning that trade. Kaido is a good card for sure, but if you follow my tips, you should be able to pressure them enough to where after they play Kaido, you can pressure them with your bombs and rip their hand right back down to size. Also, you have Kingdom Come to deal with the Kaido body itself. The Mirror Match. Dude, I have 5 cards left in my deck. Most Enel players hate playing the Mirror Match. Personally, I love it. It feels like such a skillful and drawn out game. The players that hate it are the ones you want to play against because they avoid playing it, they avoid learning it. It's important to be comfortable in this matchup. Choose to go second. The early game is really uneventful. It's truly just a battle of the kaijus. The only card that you want to turn sideways in the early game is your leader, and stop attacking your opponent once they get to 2 life so that they can't heal with Yamato. The second any character card is turned sideways, the other player will be attacking it to either remove the board or make them rip from hand. Every single discard you can force your opponent to do is incredibly valuable. The goal here is to establish a full board. Katakuri is especially important as a bomb because he can put your opponent's bombs, either Katakuri or 7-Mom, back into their life and off the field. Ace is important because he has 10k power and is harder for your opponent to swing into than the other bombs. Yamato is actually the least useful bomb in this matchup since it usually isn't popping anything and probably won't be healing since you should leave your opponent at 2 life until you push for game. The first player to establish a full board can attack in, and usually the first push won't be enough to win the game, but it will rip the hand down to size. Then the defending player can either attack at life or, more likely, they will attack into your board. If they are successful at clearing the board, they will probably win, so be sure to have plenty of counter in hand before you let your characters get attacked. If they fail at removing the board, they will probably lose, either dying the next turn or just by getting their board cleared and completely losing pace. You want to be the player who is attacking first, and you want to have enough counter in hand to defend against them attacking back into your board. Kingdom Come is also really strong for the board removal turn. It guaranteed takes down 1 bomb, and then it gives you 4 Dawn left over to buff your characters and swing on other ones. This is a long, skillful game for sure, but I promise once you're good at the mirror match, it's really fun and it's nothing to be scared of. Black, Yellow, Lofi. This matchup is another slow grind. For you anyway. They can go full speed, if they draw the right cards that is. Choose to go second, and do not attack their face down life. Their goal is to get to 0 life and use the leader's effect, so they will play these cards to take their own life. But they have to spend Dawn to commit to playing these cards, so by not attacking them, you are essentially slowing the deck down. Your only goal is to make them discard cards. That's it. You cannot win this matchup until their hand is small enough that you can use the power of math to count how much counter they could have in their hand and hit that number multiple times over their multiple Sabo blockers. The only time you want to attack their face down life is when you have enough pressure to force them to discard. Here's an example. Or discard. Either way, you would have to discard 3 cards, and I'm pretty sure I can live next turn regardless. This is where we go for the aggro push. Yeah, let me get 3 cards, please. Oh my god, 5 cards? That's more than I ever could have asked for, dude. This is Christmas. Like the mirror, every discard in this matchup is incredibly valuable. Just force them to discard as often as you can, Only attack their face down life if you have enough attacks to force them to discard, and build a big board of tall characters. Honestly, when black-yellow Lofi draws perfectly, it can feel unbeatable, but if you follow my tips, it should help you get this matchup to at least a 50-50. Lastly, let's talk about the bad matchups. These matchups are unfavorable for you, but they're definitely not unwinnable. Black Lucci. Your key cards in this matchup are Rush Enel and Blaze Slice. The reason why Lucci is a hard matchup is because this is the only deck that can consistently remove your bomb every turn while also putting up more bodies than you. Gecko Moria is massive at 9k, and summoning Moria lets them summon Rebecca into Rob Lucci. If they high roll into an early game field spell and see all of their bombs on curve, it is an uphill climb for sure. This is the only matchup where I don't always prioritize clearing board over attacking life. It definitely depends on the game state, but you want to apply some pressure to this deck. They play a lot of cards that don't have counter, usually around 20, and they don't have the same power to filter the deck as ours. Late game, swinging with ace, you could clear a Lucci, sure, but the Lucci's just going to come right back, whereas swinging 10k of life is going to land a damage. Rush Enel is the best card for this matchup because it will most likely land a damage the turn you play it, and because of his ability to protect itself, it will most likely stick around for a few turns, unlike every other card that you could play. Blaze Slice is important here too, since they like to shit out blockers super easily. This card will help you tap down the blockers and actually push for game. And finally, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite deck to play against, Mill Nami. For those who don't know, Nami is a mill deck. Her effect says, when you deck out, you win instead of losing. Enel is slow enough that this is Nami's optimal deck to play against, but don't worry, there is things that we can do. Choose to go second, which will hold back one draw from them. I know this is going to sound weird, but just trust me, you typically don't want to attack this deck in the early game. If they have Dawn up, they're going to counter out of every attack anyway, while milling cards at the same time. If they have productive cards on their turn, like Kaya and Pilaf, they will still be drawing, sure, but if they don't, they will have to draw for turn and pass, because the only cards in their hand are going to be counter cards that react to you attacking. So if you're not attacking, they won't be doing anything. Then you get to build up your board while their game state does not advance at all. Instead of attacking, play as many characters as possible and fill out the board until you have at least 3 characters on board. From this point forward, stop playing characters and use all of your Dawn to bump every attack up to 9k. 9k is the perfect number to hit Nami, since they'll have to use at least 2 cards to get out of every attack. If they use Whitesnake, pump the number up to 10k if you have enough Dawn to do so. If not, go with 8k. Now, this is the line on paper, but keep in mind that it's not set in stone, as it can change depending on the game state. As an example, if they only have up 1 Dawn and you can hit at least 7 multiple times, it can still be correct to attack because they'll only be able to get out of 1 of those attacks, and the second one will probably land. Definitely follow the tips I gave you, but also use common sense and know that these lines are not always 100% the correct thing to do. So originally I was going to include some actual gameplay at the end of this video, but I just finished editing after like 6 days and I'm already at half an hour, so I think I'm just going to make those separate videos. I'll probably call them something like how to beat Mill Nami with Enel, or how to win the Enel mirror match, something like that. So stay tuned if you want to see those. I should have some up within the week. If you're watching this and you want me to prioritize editing a certain matchup first, just let me know in the comments. I have them all filmed already. I will literally make a video for a single commenter. I don't care. If that's something that would help you, I would do that. I know most of you are just going to click around this video to maybe see the deck list, or maybe to just watch the matchup that you're struggling with. But if you're here right now and you actually watch this whole video, that is awesome. Thank you so much. Best of luck at your locals. If my advice helps you win a tournament, or even just beat your friend, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about that. Same if you have any questions. I will respond to every comment. I will answer to the best of my knowledge. If you're considering subscribing, that would be great. That would help me so much because I am really trying to get this channel off the ground. I don't know if you noticed, but I don't have a lot of subscribers, and there will be more One Piece content coming soon. I will say this is not just a One Piece channel. I also make videos about other card games. I really like playing Pokemon, and I like just talking about things that I'm passionate about. So if any of that interests you, I hope I earned your subscription today. And with all that being said, I am rambling at this point, and it is time to wrap this video up. Thanks again for watching. That's all for now. Peace.